So I'd like to just start with an invocation, if you will. Heavenly Father, we just are so grateful for your blessing of creating us and giving us an opportunity to share the gifts that you give us with others around the world, particularly through Rotary. And in our pursuit, amongst many goals, our focus today on social justice and equity. We are so blessed to have our speaker, Dr. Williams, today. We ask you to be with him and to with all of our members and guests today, that we'll be lifting each other up for the service above self that we proclaim to the world. Amen. At this point, I'd like to ask Takesha Buford to just recite the Pledge of Allegiance for us.
The Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And what a great proclamation it is. And Henderson Yarborough has agreed to recite the four-way test for us, which every Rotary Club around the world, 35,000 clubs, 1.3 million members on nearly a weekly basis, proclaim the same four-way test. Mr. Yarborough?
I don't even see him on. Maybe he dropped. Dr. Luca.
Yeah, I'm going to just divert. I'll go ahead with this. The four-way test, we typically say the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First, we say, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? 3, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And 4, will it be beneficial to all concerned? At this point, we normally have Rotary announcements. And why don't we begin with Takesha?
A few more committees are starting in the next 10 days, completing the launch of 12 new club active committees and the increase in our organization's capacity to make a difference in the world around us. Our bylaw committee, scheduled to meet tonight, has been postponed until Thursday, February 11th at 6:30 p.m. The fundraising committee will be ready by the next board meeting, scheduled for February 15th, to propose a major initiative to support pandemic issues in our community. All committee chairmen are reminded to post agendas and minutes in Rallyhood. If you haven't set up your personal account in Rallyhood, please do so immediately. We are excited about our new communication tool that will fuel our efforts locally and globally. If you experience technical difficulties, please contact me or Amanda Killingham. Club members, while we have been using Zoom for nearly 4 years now, this is our first launch of the webinar feature. We ask that all members sign into the chat room so Susan Flanagan can record your attendance. Thank you everyone for joining us at today's launch of 8 consecutive weeks of speakers addressing justice and equity. If you have not already done so, please post the announcement and web link to webinar on your social media sites. We want to push our limit of 500 Zoom participants, enlarging our impacts on the world around us. Thank you.
Thank you, Takesha. And if other members have announcements, you might type them into the chat room and we'll be able to pick them up. We have about 7 minutes before we start with our panelists this morning. And so we could include those. I see that we do have Assistant Governor Tilley Thompson has joined us. Members Chris Parker, or members Gary Wall and Jamaica Davis, Jordan Sorrell, Mike Rogers, Michelle Hassan, Sabrina Albert, And that's it so far. So we've got quite a few members of board and others coming. Some, of course, our panelists are members of the local club. Clarke Yarborough, I could say a couple of brief remarks as our attendees are at 18. Do you have any preliminary announcements, or Amanda, any technical announcements? I know that Susan Flanagan wanted members to know that since we can't see you or hear you today, that you would each type your name into the chat room. So hopefully you're able to do that, and we'll pick you up as attending this meeting today. I see Wardell Dobbins has joined us. Any other technical announcements, Armanda?
Okay, I don't know if you guys can hear me that well, but members, if you could in the attendees and the participants panel, if you could change your name, cover over your name, and you can rename your name and put your real legal name in there so that you know it's here. And also for all those people that are texting me saying they're in the waiting room, there is no waiting room, so I don't know which call you're on. This is a webinar, so everyone won't be equal, everyone won't have screen features. So if you don't see yourself, then that's normal because we're in a webinar mode. Only the panelists should have everyone is calling and can't get in.
Who's everyone, Bonnie?
Well, this is Gary.
Mr. President.
Yes.
Mr. President, I'd like Jamaica Davis as membership chair to, she has an announcement, so she's going to come on now. Jamaica?
Yeah, we couldn't hear, I could not hear Amanda.
We couldn't hear her either. I'm not sure what she said.
She wasn't finished.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think one thing, Armanda, correct me if I'm wrong, you were asking folks if they come in under a pseudonym or phone number or other things to make sure that their name is visible for attendance purposes as well. And then, again, we want to remind everyone to type your name into the chat window so we have a record of your attendance. And as well, any questions that you might have, technical or otherwise.
Yes.
Can I go now?
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. As membership chair, I welcome you all to our Black History Lecture Series. Rotary is an international service club. We raise money to distribute to local and international organizations. We are a global network of 1.2 million people in 35,000 clubs worldwide. Rotary is where neighbors, friends, and problem solvers share ideas, join leaders, and take action to create lasting change. We promote peace, fight disease, provide clean water, sanitation, and hygiene, save mothers and children, support education, grow local economics. If you would like to join and know more about Rotary, please give me, I'm going to put my email address in the chat, and please give me a call or email.
Thank you, Jamaica.
Thank you.
With just 2 minutes to go, Clarke Yarborough, would it be okay if I started a welcome at this point and transition to our start?
Right ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to welcome everyone that's here today, members and non-members alike. This is another exciting, popular lecture series, but more than popular, critical in this day and age in our nation. And just meeting Dr. Williams a moment ago, I'm grateful for your presence, Dr. Williams, and thankful that you're here to join us and to share with us today to help us to focus in on the dilemmas that others face outside our club and within the club, perhaps. It's a privilege for me to serve this year as the club president, and especially today with guests like you, Dr. Williams. I find it hard to imagine. Can you imagine in 1924, our forefathers were actually being innovative when they started this club, the first fraternal organization amongst community and business leaders to be founded in the world. as far as we know. 97 years later, we remain focused on innovation. Our club aspires to lead the way in technological advances to enhance meeting delivery, engagement of members, those in need around the world, support for strategic planning and communication. Proviso Township, a lot of you might not be aware, a place where Lindbergh used to land to deliver mail. Percy Julian began his family here. 2 astronauts graduated from our high schools. This is the home of numerous NBA stars and even a football Hall of Famer. Other celebrities. The township has also been home to numerous activists for the cause of social justice and equity, most notably perhaps Fred Hampton. While we celebrate our history, we are committed 100% to service above self. As Jamika just said, can you imagine one of 35,000 clubs making a mark on the world? 1.3 or 1.2 million members today have spent over $2 billion in the fight to eradicate polio from the planet. We're helping with sun ovens in Africa, water in starving nations, feeding people, helping people to survive hurricanes and earthquakes and other natural disasters. I ask our guests today, like Jamika just did, to consider whether you would like to be part of this winning team. Inquire, for more information via email to maywoodprovisorotary@gmail.com or providing your contact information in the chat room today. That's maywoodprovisorotary@gmail.com. I'll type it in a moment. Thanks again for joining us today. What a remarkable day and a remarkable series. Thank you, Clarke Yarborough, for your leadership.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and it's my honor to participate as well and to present our Black History Month series, which will we have set up for the next 3 Thursdays, some dynamic speakers. But I thought for our first guest that it was important to start from the beginning. And Dr. Lance Williams is going to lead us in that discussion. I couldn't be more thrilled that when I reached out to him that he immediately said, Karen, whatever you need. Well, what we need today, Dr. Williams, is your insightfulness, your breadth of history, and where things have come from the time of the person that you're going to discuss today. And I'm not going to take your thunder. I had the opportunity to meet Lance a number of years ago when we were in graduate school together. I noticed that he was a very serious student about his people and very serious about the challenges in the community. So he currently is a professor of urban community studies at the historic Jacob H. Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies. That is housed at Northeastern Illinois University. His fields of special interest include the mass media's influence on adolescent behaviors, culture, street organization, and youth violence. He served as the national coordinator of the African American Male Initiative for the President's Roundtable. He's the author of Culture and Perceptions of Violence-Related Behaviors Amongst Adolescents. He's the co-author of a book entitled The Almighty Black Pea Stone Nation, The Fall and Rise and Resurgence of an American Gang, and also the author of a forthcoming book, King David and Boss Daily. I look forward to that, Lance. His expertise has been frequently aired and published by numerous international, national, and local media outlets such as Al Jazeera, French TV Canal, CNN, BET, HBO, Ebony and Jet Magazine, and a number of other cable, television, radio, and print media. I give to all of you, my friend, and somebody who's working very, very hard, not at symptoms in the communities, but root causes to address issues in the community, in the Chicagoland community and across the continent. My friend, Dr. Lance Williams.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction, Clarke Yarborough. I really appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate so much the invitation. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank President Lipka also for his introduction and his welcome, and the rest of our distinguished Rotary members. It's always a pleasure and an honor to have a chance to talk and discuss and build, as we say, with those who are fighting for social justice across the United States of America. And so really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm going to ask, I don't know who's the host, but I'm wondering if the host can allow me to share my screen. Is that possible? Mr. or Mrs. Host?
It doesn't look like I can do that right now.
Karen, you are muted.
No, I'm sorry, Dr. Lance. I didn't know you had a presentation. I'm not seeing where I can allow you to share.
You are muted.
Frank, can you share the screen?
Unfortunately, only Armanda can. She's in charge of the.
Okay, let's. It's not a big deal. We could definitely, certainly move forward. If someone at any particular point in time can give me access to sharing the screen, I'll share the screen. If not, we'll still have an engaged discussion, because the history and legacy, as Clarke Yarborough mentioned, the history and legacy of this month that we're celebrating, Black History Month, has a very, very unique and storied history. And it begins with the individual who history records as the actual father of Black history, and that is Mr. Carter G. Woodson. And so we'll take the topic, our topic of discussion for today, Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black history. And what we'll try to do today, I'll give you a quick overview. We will basically, I'll give you a background and an overview of the life and times of Carter G. Woodson, just so that you know his life trajectory. And then from there, what we will do is we will focus on one of his premier, probably his most notable pieces of scholarship, called The Miseducation of the Negro. Although he's the author of, approximately 30 books, it's The Miseducation of the Negro that was the book that really put his work on the map, so to speak. And then from there, what we will do is we will try to have a final word from Carter G. Woodson, and then open it up for discussion and try to connect his work and his legacy and the legacy of the need for Black History Month, the need for his work, and make it relevant to today's society, particularly as it relates to young people, because that was his passion. His passion as an educator was to ensure that African-American youth really understood the importance of connecting their education, what they learned in the classroom, to their environment. So the place that Clarke Yarborough and I studied at the Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies with some of the greatest African-American scholars in the United States of America, individuals like Jacob H. Carruthers, who the center is named in honor of today, was one of our professors, Dr. Anderson Thompson, Dr. Robert Starks, Dr. Conrad Worrell, Dr. Gloria Peace. These were some very distinguished scholars. But the motto at the center was to train African Americans to be activist scholars. So the point was not to just do scholarship for the sake of scholarship, as many academic institutions do. The argument was that that is not enough for African Americans because of the condition of our community. So we needed to be trained to be scholars, then to take that scholarship and make it active in our communities and in our workspaces. And so that follows the tradition of Carter G. Woodson, because he wanted young people to apply their education to improve their own personal lives, the lives of their families, and the lives of their community. So we're working in the lineage. When I say we, those of us who are graduates of the degree programs at the Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies at Northeastern Illinois University, and those that we work with are following in this lineage and tradition. So we're going to try to, again, do an overview of Carter G. Woodson and do a little focus on his classic book, The Miseducation of the Negro, and then a final word from Dr. Woodson, and then open it up for discussions. Is everybody okay with that? You can give me a thumbs up or yes. Raise a hand, or okay, so that's cool. So we'll move forward. So let's go back to the early years of Carter G. Woodson. So Carter G. Woodson was born in New Canton, Virginia, December. And you know what? The professor in me is wanting to ask you to take notes, because I think I might give you a pop quiz after this.
Oh!
I'm just kidding. No pop quiz. But especially since you can't see the screen, you might want to jot down notes so that you could use them for our discussion. But Carter G. Woodson was born again in New Canton, Virginia, December 19th, 1875. His parents, James and Eliza Riddle Woodson, they were former slaves, right? So this contextualizes his work and his background. He had a large family, of course, very poor, and it made it, the poverty of the family made it impossible for him to go to school, because his father needed him for labor so that they could generate income to survive, right? And so he was never able to go to school as a child, but he always had a thirst for knowledge and learning. And so by the age of 17, young Carter had basically taught himself the fundamentals of the basic school subjects. So reading, writing, and arithmetic, he basically, talked to those who understood those subjects, some relatives. I know a couple of his uncles helped him a lot to develop these fundamental skills. And so at the age of 18, he got a job working in the coal mines in I believe in Virginia, right? So he's working in a coal mine, 17 years old, still having a passion to learn, right? And so what he does is he saves his money from his job working in a coal mine. He saves the money and he pays for an high school education. So by the age of 20, what happens is that he begins his formal education at 20 years old, a 4-year curriculum. And he was so hungry and thirsty for knowledge, he finished that curriculum in 2 years, right? And so after finishing high school, he was able to attend a variety of colleges in West Virginia, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and even Illinois. And ultimately, and interestingly for us, those of us in this region, in this area, he finally earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Chicago in 1907. And this is when I don't know if you guys know this history, but the first site of the University of Chicago was located in Bronzeville, right on the corner of 35th and Cottage Grove, was the first campus of the University of Chicago prior to them moving their campus to the Hyde Park community that we're familiar with today. And so interestingly, the University of Chicago housed in Bronzeville at a time where the Great Migration was occurring in the city of Chicago, and tens of thousands of African Americans were moving from the South to Chicago. And Carter G. Woodson was a part of that great black migration, right? And so he finds himself in Chicago earning a master's degree, undergraduate degree in 1907 and a master's degree in 1908. And then finally, he earned a PhD, he was able to matriculate to Harvard University, where he earned a PhD in 1912. He was only the second African-American to do so, to earn a PhD from Harvard. Does anybody know who the first African-American was to earn a PhD from Harvard University? Anybody? Take a wild guess. The first African-American to earn a PhD from Harvard University.
We have some people in the chat.
Let me check the chat.
Okay.
Let me see the chat. This again is the professor and me wanting to always quiz. Hey, a lot of people have it. A lot of people. I see the first two entries. And for those of you that can't see the chat, many of your colleagues have it right. W.E.B. Du Bois. Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois is the first African American to earn his PhD from Harvard University. So, okay, back to the presentation. So what happens is that after he finishes, and it's so much, I mean, his history and his background is so dense, and there's no way that I can cover all of this in the short period of time that we have, so I'm kind of skipping over some things. But I will say this, that after he completed his PhD, Dr. Woodson found himself in DC, went to DC to teach, and was there for about 10 years. And during the time that he was there, he got a teaching position at Howard University. And at Howard University, he became the dean, I believe, of the College of Education at that time. But he also at that time became a member of the NAACP. And of course, you know the relationship between E.B. Du Bois and the NAACP and the history of the NAACP. But at a certain point, Dr. Woodson fell out with the NAACP. He thought that they were a little too timid in representing the interests of African Americans. And so he wrote him a hot letter, not really a hot letter, it was very, very eloquent letter, and basically resigned from his work with the NAACP and ended up coming back to Bronzeville in Chicago. So by 1915, Dr. Woodson is really, he's becoming very anxious about the need for African Americans to understand their history and legacy. So remember, he was, and I don't know if I got into this, but after he graduated from high school, and I didn't mention this, but after he graduated from high school, he immediately became a high school teacher, and then ultimately a high school principal. Like, this is in his early 20s. This is prior to him, leaving for Chicago to earn his bachelor's degree at the University of Chicago. So he's got a great deal of experience working with young people. And what he's beginning to see is that African-American youth are struggling with education because they don't have a sense of orientation. In other words, they can't place themselves within the context of what they're learning, right? And so he sees a need for them to understand who they are in a relationship to what they're learning, between what they're learning and their communities, their lived experience. Ultimately, what he begins to see is that there is a need as they're studying Greek life and Roman life and Western civilization, that the role of that in Western society is to give the learners a sense of self-identity and purpose. And he believes that, that's important for African-American youth as well, right? And so ultimately, he's not seeing any institutional support for this. And so what he does is in 1915, he gets together with a small group of his colleagues. He's back in Chicago now, living at the Wabash YMCA. And this is a historic place right on, I think the Wabash YMCA is about 38th and Wabash, somewhere in that area. And this is where he is living. And just so you know, it's said that, you know, Carter G. Woodson is a very, very stoic individual, didn't do a lot of socializing, just really focused on his scholarship. So he gets together with a small group of his colleagues, and they develop an organization called the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And that association then created a journal, a periodical called the Journal of Negro History, which Carter G. Woodson edited, right? So the Journal of Negro History. And the publication remained a very important historical reference on the subject of African or African American history for more than 30 years. And then the journal, then 30 years later, became the Journal of History. And in 1916, Dr. Woodson and his colleagues also produced the Negro History Bulletin. And in 1937, that became one of the most important publications for Black scholars to actually disseminate their scholarship, right? So right around the time, I think I heard Dr. Lipka state that the Rotary Club was founded in 1924. 2 years later, Carter G. Woodson founded, on February 7, 1926, he founded Negro History Week, right? And so he started Negro History Week February 7, 1926. Now, there is, you know, we hear this this critique and criticism often about Negro history or Black History Month, right? Being, you know, we hear this a lot in the African American community. Wow, you know, they gave us February to celebrate Black history, and it's the shortest month of the year. You know, that's an often common criticism. But what we have to take into consideration is that it didn't start off as African History Month. It just, Carter G. Woodson started it off as Negro History Week. And the purpose of that Negro History Week was just to recognize the contributions that African Americans had made to history, right? And over a 7-day period. Now, he picked February because February was the birth month of Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln. It was also, there were some other distinguishing characteristics about February that caused him to, the NAACP, the NAACP also was founded in February. So he picked February as the month to celebrate Negro History Week because of the birthdays of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. And then ultimately, when Negro History Week was expanded in 1976, naturally, it's going to be expanded in the month of February. And that is the reason that we have Black History Month in February. Okay, so that's a little background of Carter G. Woodson. What I want to do now is just ask you, are there any questions, comments, or concerns about what I've presented to you thus far, prior to us getting into the great work of the miseducation of the Negro? Anybody got any questions, comments, or concerns? Okay. All right, so we'll move on.
I might just clarify, Dr. Williams, when I mentioned at the outset 1924, that
Yes.
was the date for chartering our local club. Rotary began in 1905, but folks in Proviso Township in the village of Maywood actually had the foresight to start a club in 1924.
Wow. Okay, thank you so much for that correction. Thank you so much. So let's move it along. So Carter G. Woodson had a quote, and I think this sets the tone for his historic work. Right, he says, and I really want us to have a discussion about this. He said that if a race has no history, if it has no worthwhile tradition, it becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated. That's a powerful statement. Again, if a race has no history, if it has no worthwhile tradition, it becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated. It's Carter G. Woodson. Now, what we have to take into consideration is that up until the 20th century, although it was untrue, it was a widely held belief among whites and blacks that African Americans had no history of any significance of importance beyond what? Slavery. Even though there was concrete evidence, scholarship of Nile Valley civilization, of civilizations in Africa that can be traced back to the beginning of civilization, there is very little scholarship that would argue that actually the first civilization that ever existed or was founded in Africa, right? And so, but I don't have a lot of time to get into how that history was lost, but it has a lot to do with the justification of the transatlantic slave trade was one of the primary reasons that history was erased. And remember, at this particular time in the history of Carter G. Woodson, we are just coming out of that period of chattel slavery. And so America had not, and even hasn't gotten to the point where it has acknowledged the damage that was done by the transatlantic slave trade. But one of the biggest damaging forces of that transatlantic slave trade was that it systematically destroyed the history and buried the history of African Americans. And why did it do that? It did that for political reasons. The political reasons were that America needed to justify slavery because slavery was an inhumane act. And America that professed to be a Judeo-Christian society founded on righteousness, freedom, justice, and equality was confronted with this problem of the transatlantic slave trade, that if African Americans were truly humans, then you have violated their humanity, questioning who you actually say you are. And so what they had to do was they had to consistently, systematically say, well, African Americans have no history. And this is what Carter G. Woodson was attempting to correct. Even though there was concrete evidence there, it was ignored. And so he recognized that there needed to be a significant contribution to world history on every level, socially, politically, economically, and that these contributions will remain largely unknown, unsung, and unnoticed until his work. And so this is the greatness of Carter G. Woodson becoming the father of Black history. He begins now to establish the institutions and the scholarship and the space for the scholarship to now bring back African history to and place it on the world stage. Now, what he does is he uses his scholarship to do that. And one of his most profound pieces of scholarship is a book called The Miseducation of the Negro. Right, and in the book, The Miseducation of the Negro, again, Carter G. Woodson wrote more than 125 articles. He authored more than 30 books. But again, the most famous of these books was A Miseducation of the Negro. It was written in 1933. So what the book does is it offers reflections on his extensive experiences as an educator. So he's giving you the various experiences that he had as an educator, primarily in the South. And not only did he educate African Americans, he educated poor whites as well. And so this period of being an educator spanned over a 40-year period. And not only did he teach in the United States of America, but he taught in the Philippines, in Europe, in other parts of the world, right? But the term that he used most in the miseducation of the Negro was a term that he called miseducative. Miseducative. And he said that miseducative was what was actually going on with educating poor Black students. And he said that because they were not learning about themselves, the education that they received created a split in their personality. And he said it was a split in the personality of Blacks typified by dual identities. And it resulted in a profound identity crisis, right? And so what does he mean by that? He means that on one hand, your reality is that you are a Negro or you're a Black in American society. So that is definitely one of your social identities. At the same time, you're in school and you're learning about essentially white society and white supremacy. And in order to progress in life, you have to adopt the value system of the larger white society, which then conflicts with your own identity, right? And so that needed to be corrected, according to Carter G. Woodson, to move away from this miseducative, right? So now, he claimed that in his experience that Negroes basically essentially imitated white society, particularly educated Blacks. He says that Blacks were never educated, but were only informed about the world and about things around them. Because in matters of education, he said, Negroes are subjected to the will of others, right? Which then makes us experience what he calls a nobodiness, that you suffer from being nobody. The neglect of African American history, he said, and distortions of the facts concerning Negroes in most history books, which deprive the Black child and his whole race of a heritage and relegated him to nothingness and nobodiness, right? So, you know, what we were learning in school. And again, what I want to do, you know, having our discussion is how different is the experience that many of our African-American youth having today in the classroom, much different than this conversation that Carter
It appears we lost our speaker's signal, and hopefully it'll return quickly.
I hope so.
We do have a question I'll throw out there, just if he's able to hear, from a participant. Shayna Porter asked, how did he get his book published? And then there's a comment that absent history, accurate history, in the present, cultures are defined by those who might control or oppress.
That's a very good question. I don't know who published his book, but perhaps since he went to Harvard, perhaps they did. But I could imagine that during that time, it must have been very difficult, because he certainly was challenging an institution, you know, certainly an institution of education. And one of the things I remember about this book, and by the way, you should by all means get this book. I know I have several copies in my office because I've shared them over the years, the Miseducation of the Negro by Woodson. But there are a number of things there, but you can you can kind of understand that if a person is miseducated, and it's what they know. And I think Lance is coming back. So, okay, Lance, you're on. You're on mute. You're mute.
Okay, here I am. Okay, sorry.
We had two questions while you were out.
Okay.
Could I give you both at the same time? I'll give you one. You can respond and then ask me for the second one. That's from Shana Porter. How did he get his book published?
How did he get his book published?
No, how did Carter Woodson get his book published?
Oh, well, you know, I don't. So remember, Carter G. Woodson recognized that the infrastructure was not in place at his time to produce scholarship. So he self-published his work.
Oh.
Now, what happened afterwards, because his work became so popular? Remember, you know, they had the Negro History Journal, and so he created his own publishing company. But what happened was later, I think, and I don't know how this happened, but several other publishing companies were able to acquire his book and publish it. And I think the last publisher of the Miseducation of the Negro, I'm not sure about the other 30 books, the other 29 books, but I think it was it Third World Press that got it?
Africa World Press.
Africa World Press. Yeah. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, is that Ta-Nehisi Coates' father's publishing company? It may be. I know Ta-Nehisi Coates' father was big in publishing out east in Baltimore, and he may have gotten his hands on the book and got the rights to publish it, but I'm not sure. But right, it's African World Press, I think are the latest to publish the book. But to answer your question, he created his own publishing company and published his own work initially.
The second question had to do with just our observations in education and possible changes we saw take place. And I'll just note, and this may fit in with what you talk about later, that even people with their hearts in the right place, good hearts, caring and loving teachers, can have their expectations level to the immediate past history of their community. Not only teachers, parents, business leaders, the entire community can level to the current performance, if you will, of students, rather than retaining high rigor and high expectations. And when you change that expectation to high regard for the capacity of a group of people, they'll rise to the occasion. And I saw that working throughout the state.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so let me leave us with this last Carter G. Woodson famous quote, and I'm hoping this can kick off our discussion. So in Miseducation of the Negro, and those who are students of Dr. Carter G. Woodson will recognize this quote immediately. The quote is this: if you can control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about his actions. If you can determine what a man thinks, you do not have to worry about what he will do. If you can make a man believe that he's inferior, you don't have to compel him to seek inferior status. He will do so without being told. And if you can make a man believe that he is justly an outcast, you don't have to order him to the back door. He will go to the back door on his own. And if there is no back door, the very nature of the man will demand that you build one. So that concludes my presentation of Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black history, and the need for Black history. And at this time, I would like to just open it up for a dialogue for us to discuss some of what we have presented today. And maybe we can just start with just the first sentence of this last quote and maybe kick around what this means to us. And that is, if you can control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about what his actions, or you don't have to worry about his actions. What does that mean to us? What does that mean?
Dr. Williams, so as people are answering your question, they should raise their hand, and then I will allow them to speak from from where they're at. So
Okay.
everyone that wants to speak with Dr. Williams, raise your hand, and then I'll get to you.
Okay, perfect. Beautiful.
Did people hear that though? If you would like to ask a question or comment, you need to raise your hand and she's going to allow you to speak.
Right. So let me ask the question one more time. I'm asking us to kind of give us your feedback and your feelings about this first sentence in the quote. If you can control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about his actions. Does anybody want to kind of weigh in on that?
So Taylor, you're up.
Dr. Williams, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to come and be with us today. I appreciate this so much as you're, moving forward the best way you can, the scholar that you are, with assisting with making sure that, we are educated about Dr. Clarke G. Woodson and African American history. My point that I wanted to throw out, I kind of raised my hand a little bit before you asked to specifically speak on that particular topic or quote there, but I guess I can bring the two together. Controlling a man's thinking. I have a question as pertains to, not necessarily a question, but a statement and a question rather. Prior to 1619, when the group of 20 some odd Africans were captured at sea and brought here to the New World in Virginia, I believe it was Virginia. Prior to that, prior to Africans thinking being controlled, I'm of the belief based upon my study, and definitely you can let me know a little bit more. But there was a group of people called the Moors. Is that right, sir? Am I pronouncing that name correctly?
Yes, sir.
There were a group of people called the Moors, and the question I have here is, were they from the northern part of Africa or were they from the Middle East? And if you had to control a person's thinking, when those Africans got here to the New World, to Jamestown, Virginia, what type of people were we? If the Moors were from Africa, how mighty of an organization and an army were the Moors? Who were the leaders in that army as they penetrated into Spain, as they conquered Spain? You really had to do a job on a group of people who had that ability to go into Spain, to penetrate it and to conquer it. And if you could just tell me a little bit about that, if you don't mind, I really would appreciate it if you could just add a little bit more value to me in that capacity.
Yes, absolutely. So as it relates to the Moors, and a lot of people know about the history of the Moors and their basic, or I should say their, did I lose us again? No, okay, I'm still here. Okay, and the Moors conquering Spain for 700 years. But the period of time that we're looking at, that the Moors actually were in power, was a period in African history where Africans had already been colonized by the Arab world community, the Muslim world community. So as you mentioned, the Moors were North Africans. They were in the area of Mauritania, Libya, all up around, the North African region. But that area had already been conquered essentially by the Arabs, who then, of course, colonizing the Africans had brought their religion. And so to answer your question about who the Moors were a mixture of indigenous Africans who basically had been colonized by Arabs, but at the same time, Arabs being colonizers were among them. So they were kind of a mixture of Arabs and Africans, and then kind of a hybrid of Africans and Arabs who had, they had ethnic, marriages and relationships. And so kind of that was the ethnicity of them, so to speak. Now, our African ancestors that were enslaved generally came from further south in Africa, West Africa, Central Africa, and not necessarily off the coast of Africa, but kind of inward, Central and West Africa, and basically were the ones that were during the period that you mentioned in 1619 that were brought here from, lower down the coast. And then, of course, that transatlantic slave trade lasted for over 300 years. And
okay,
so,
we have three more people who would like to speak or would like to ask a question too.
Okay.
So I know we don't have a lot of time here, but can you wrap up that question so you can? I want to hear from
Okay.
Carmen Colvin has a question.
Okay, I'm finished.
Would you finish? Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah.
Next up, Carmen Colvin.
Mine was not so much of a question as a statement. And I think it's just so relevant today that we're dealing with the same issues that we dealt with so many years ago, speaking about controlling a man thinking and action. And it goes back to what I deal with when I'm working with so many youth is understanding their value and their self-worth, and how this society has continued to perpetuate the thought process that we don't have any value. And it's so important in our community that we recognize our own value, we honor ourselves, and we demand respect, not only from each other, where it begins, but we demand respect from others. And part of the challenge that I see today is that we just don't respect each other enough. And we tend to take it for granted when nothing in this life can be taken for granted. So we're continuing to relive a history that puts us in a place of shame or degradation or not feeling value.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. Next, Michelle.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Doctor, for being here with us and sharing with us. Relating to your question, if you can control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about his actions. I think this relates back to the first quote that you shared in terms of a race not having their history becoming like a negligible factor, and just thinking that because Black history is not taught in schools, that Black youth, their thinking is controlled through the teaching. And one of my favorite quotes from Carter G. Woodson is that like lynching wouldn't occur if it didn't occur first in the classroom. And so we wonder why our youth have so many issues, and we're not sometimes thinking about all of the images. And I know this is part of what you like to do, but all of the images that they're being shown through the media and things like that that are just perpetrating that this is what you should be doing, this is what Black people are about, and all of those horrible messages are just continuing to contribute to the factor. So again, thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you, Michelle. Next up is Brian Cross.
I think one of the biggest problems we also have is the ideological teachings in so many of our textbooks and so much of our history, and trying to rewrite history from a fictional standpoint. You look at the whitewashing of the 1619 Project. It's very, very difficult to look in the mirror and see the scars on your face. Nobody wants to see that. But in the same standpoint, you have to recognize the scars and where they came from, and the heinous behavior shown really for the past 400 years. It's 402 years if you look at it. And when they were trying to push it, when different ideological factions were trying to whitewash this New York Times project, which was very well written, and it gave it was not perfect, but it gave a much better perspective. And one of the other problems that we face, surprisingly too, is from being in education for a bit on a school board, in reading about it and doing the research is the dilemma of the Texas textbook. So many of our textbook publishers cater to Texas because there's such a large, bio.
Yeah.
Okay, and they whitewash the story of slavery. They whitewash Rosa Parks. They whitewash the entire 60s. And it's to what you speak of, Doc, is you're not teaching these. You've got these textbooks or these programmatic things, from Houghton Mifflin or whoever it may be. And they referred, I was just reading while you were speaking and you were talking about it, and they referred to Rosa Parks as a tired woman. And not recognizing why she took the action she did, but referring to her as a tired woman. And these are the things we have to change before we have equitable education for all, is to teach the truth. It's like teaching the story of World War II without mentioning the heroism in Italy or the Tuskegee Airmen or Dory, it's just not right. So
thanks, Brian. Okay, next up is Jay Williams.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. This is Jonathan Williams. I just wanted to say that I think that when I was in school, in elementary school in the late 60s, it was like a renaissance of Black history at the time. That was back in the day when, slogans like "Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud" were in vogue. And, there was actually a lot of Black history taught in our elementary school, a Chicago public elementary school, where we had literally portraits and biographies of great African American inventors, heroes, professors, of course, people like Carter G. Woodson. And it does appear over time there has been a bit of a regression in the teaching of Black history in the schools. The emphasis that I was exposed to, I don't think there's as much emphasis now, and I'd like to know if a professor thinks that that is the case, or perhaps it's it's something that is having a renaissance now, or could use a little more of a push.
No, I agree 100%, with you, and the data actually indicates that it's actually worse now than it was in the late 60s, early 70s, and that's primarily due to the fact that we've lost so many African American teachers, particularly in urban communities. We at one point, I know in Chicago public school system, we were up to well over 40 to 50% of the teachers were African American. Now it's beneath 20%, right? And the numbers are going down, and a large part of that contributes to the fact that, or the problem of African American history being taught in the schools. It just challenges that because you don't have as many African American teachers as you had at one point.
Wow.
Yes. There's let's see, Randall Jackson. Can you unmute Randall so he can speak?
Yes, thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Madam Yarbrough. Just kind of piggybacking on much of what Jonathan and even Michelle had mentioned, and even Brian. So even from my own personal experience, the narrative within grammar school, which was like late 80s, early 90s, and then even in the high school, early 90s, mid 90s, was just that, you're right, Doctor, we didn't have enough African American teachers to be able to express that. So it's kind of like a lot of the school districts kind of forced narrative on students to learn this specific set of items versus things that were a little bit more diverse and expansive. I think that the problem that exists now is that resources are available, and it's very we're very blessed in this environment that we have folks like yourself who, you're bringing out that information. I think sometimes, though, you do have a lot of the youth currently who maybe don't know to access that, and maybe it's just not enough word, or it's not enough of mentoring type of circumstance for them to be able to understand it. I didn't know a lot of this until I actually got to college. And I was blessed to be able to have a couple of teachers who were very thoughtful enough to, guide me to the resources that were made available. And, then from that point, you began to explore even further yourself, what are different folks who have been influential and different patterns and paradigms that exist. And so with that knowledge, you're like, wow, this whole time I've missed this, never expressed in grammar school, never expressed in high school. Then you start to see the world a lot different. And then there's a little bit of frustration with that too, because you feel like there's a lot of lost time. So to point to what Jonathan was mentioning, and maybe that question is, I do feel that the youth have a great opportunity to be able to access these resources and understand this knowledge base. But it seems to be a gap, though, between what they're currently living versus folks, and probably many of you who've experienced much of the civil rights movements, and also understanding that mindset, from that and bringing that forward and never forgetting that, and then using that as motivation and as some benefit to moving and pushing the agenda forward for African Americans. But I do feel like there's still that gap, because I don't know if there are strong enough mentorship programs across the United States that really bridge that gap.
So thank you, Randall. Dr. Williams, I know we have 4 minutes, and what I would like you to do is, one, wrap up, and secondly, Dr. Williams has written a book on culture and perceptions of violence-related behavior amongst adolescents, and his work, in the African American community is vast. We're going to have him come back, if he will, not during this session, but another session to discuss solutions to some of the issues that people have raised. Lance?
Okay, so Clarke Yarborough, thanks again for inviting me, President Lipka. So honored to have had this opportunity to share with you today. I'll say this is critical. A critical discussion that needs to be had in a lot of different places, but primarily in places where our young people are being educated. We need to have this discussion with educators, elected officials. We need to have a discussion with the young people themselves, their parents. And we need to institutionalize this. We need to make the work of Dr. Woodson a part of every curriculum in the United States of America. And so that they understand, that our young people understand the connection between their identity and what they learn. Because until you can apply or you can make relevant what you're learning to your own personal life, and you can see how you come from a people that have contributed to the society that you live in, nothing that you learn will have any value. So I thank you for creating this space to have this dialogue and this discussion.
Yeah,
I'm glad to come back at any time. And so I'll leave it there.
Yeah, shifting over. Yep.
And turn it back over to the host.
I'm going to turn it over to the President so that he might close us out. I hope that our participants who have been with us today learned something from this presentation. And also, you need to head out to the bookstore and get The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. It will open your eyes and maybe your ears so that you can learn and understand who you are and whose you are. Dr. Lipka?
Yeah, thank you, Clerk Yarborough, for bringing Dr. Williams to us. Dr. Williams, for being here today. You spoke not only to our intellect, but also to our heart. You're easy to listen to, and at the same time, so professional, polished, and skilled. What an amazing opportunity for us. Really grateful to you. Thank you. And thank you everyone else for attending today. I think this is a remarkable session for Rotary, and we're going to continue the dialogue. I'm sure we have many more questions we could ask if time permitted, but blessings to you, Dr. Williams, and your future work.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lipka.
And Gary Wells ringing the gong as we speak. We can't hear it. But
Okay.
This
Dr.
meeting is
Lipka,
adjourned.
I'd like, Dr. Lipka, this is Diamond. I
Yes.
just want to say that we are, as Clerk Yarborough did mention earlier, we are having speakers each week of this month, each Thursday. So if you you can check the Rotary's website, our Maywood Proviso Rotary website, and each week it will be updated with the link for you to log on and access the workshops. So the link, I did put it in the chat, it's maywoodrotary.clubexpress.com.
Yeah, check out the website and watch for future speakers. It's been a great year for speakers. Dr. Williams, you're amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.